Welcome to Speak Out. I'm Sandy Galiff, a member of the New York State Assembly representing parts of northern Westchester and parts of Putnam County. And today we're going to be talking about the past, the present, and the future of policing. And I am so fortunate to have some wonderful guests with me today. First, I'd like to introduce Eric Johansson, who is the police chief in the city of Peekskill. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you here. How long have you been police chief now?
3 years, almost
3
to
years.
the day, yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to go to Joe Burton, who was the Ossining police chief, but still a chief. And you had worked you just retired, and you'd worked for the Ossining Police Department for
48 years.
48 years, right. So, and chief for
24.
24.
2 jobs, same building.
Right. So, so let's talk a little bit. Well, from Joe's perspective, you've been there for a long time now. Mm-hmm. Can you give us an idea of what's changed? I don't know whether Ossining's changed, the world's changed, policing's changed, but what was it when you first started out?
The change is all of the above. Policing has changed a lot in just the way I was hired. Mm-hmm. I went looking for the Ossining Police Station to set up an interview, found it. Mm-hmm.
And this is what you're going to be, just a police officer?
Yep. I had passed the test, and I was going up there to see. I didn't want to be late for an interview, so I wanted to know where the Ossining Police Department was, because it was coming up from Yonkers. And I walked in, and they said, oh, hold on. They called the chief. 15 minutes later, I walked out. I had a job.
Oh, you mean you can't do that today?
I don't think so. They're a little different. There's a lot of interviews, a lot of background checks, and just that, psychological checks, medicals, and that's changed a lot. It takes a while. It takes months before you hire somebody. You do a lot of background checks. 1967, nobody wanted to be a cop.
Right.
So they took, if you were a warm body and passed the test.
So there were a lot of vacancies, and a lot of people weren't going into the field at that point. Mm-hmm. I mean, we do have. So, Eric, how long have you been, you've been police chief for
3 years.
3 years, and how long have you been a police officer?
Just about 22 years now. I came on in February of 1994. A little bit of a different process than Chief Burton. But, similar, just longer. Interviews, tests, but we did go through psychological examinations, medical examinations, and an extensive background. And that's only been enhanced now as we've come 22 years down the road.
Right. And during that period of time, were there a lot of people that were interested in policing?
Very competitive in the early 90s. Probably even earlier than that, from the 80s on. It was a good job then. It's a good job now. But yes, very competitive process, and it remains a competitive process. We get a number of people that want to be police officers, but for one reason or another can't be, and we have to exclude them as we look to find the right person for the job. Right,
and there are those tests that go on, but every once in a while, I think we stop them, don't we? That maybe we have enough people that are already registered that are looking for jobs. Do we cut back on
the tests?
Are
coming up every 4 years for the towns and villages, including the cities in Westchester. Right. And even at the end of 4 years, there's a lot of people still left on the list.
Yeah, you really have to score well on a test. 75 or an 80 is not going to get you an interview. Really, you have to get an 85 and above, and really even 90 or above to get to become reachable by civil service rules and standards. But yeah, it's every 4 years, and like Chief Burton said, at the end, there's quite a few people left on that list.
Right. So it means that you actually have to have more talents today. You have to have more education and so on than you had to long ago. Or longer ago. Yeah,
right. It's surprisingly, and I shouldn't say it's surprisingly in that way, but a lot of our officers now are coming with college degrees, and not just college degrees in criminal justice, but a lot of accounting degrees. The last group that we hired, I had a lawyer in there. I had a school teacher in there with and a journeyman plumber.
School teachers, tradesmen. Just about every trade you can imagine. But yeah, education is key now. I mean, I look for it when I hire people. It's important to me. I also look for past life experience. I like to see people that have done other things because really, to me, you shouldn't just come right to the policing field out of college. You should have some sort of background in another field. I think it helps to kind of ground you and give you a starting point.
Right. Well, you understand life a little bit, families a little
Absolutely.
bit, businesses, and all of that. So, Joe, when you thinking back to the 60s, I guess, do you recall some of the issues? I mean, or how different are the issues, policing issues today than they were back then?
I don't think the issues have. I think the demand of what people expect from you has grown. A lot didn't call you for minor things, you've been involved in the ambulance corps for a number of years and you realize how many calls are going out to them. People didn't call for an ambulance for a headache. They took care of it themselves.
Right. Oh,
now
so
that's
now,
coming.
right.
So they're calling you for,
Right.
for more demands and, a lot of things that they solve themselves. But overall, when you look at the crimes, I can go back to the history into the 1900s and you see that there's larcenies, there's burglaries, there's, domestic problems. And go in today and it's just the same and just sometimes it's more violent than it was.
And in Peekskill, how long have you been? Have you been in Peekskill almost all of your policing time?
I've actually was born and raised in Peekskill. Went through the Peekskill school system. My first and only policing job was with the police department here in Peekskill. So it's really all I know in terms of a professional policing experience. But we're lucky here. I would agree with Joe that the classifications of crimes haven't changed. The volume really hasn't changed. I think it's all relative in terms of your population. If your population increases, crime is going to increase. If it decreases, I think you'll see the same. But yeah, it's we're lucky in Peekskill. We have a relatively low crime rate, especially given our socioeconomic diversity. We're a close-knit community, one that everyone knows one another, and that helps to keep crime down. And when a crime does occur, we get a lot of cooperation, which only helps us solve issues quickly.
Right. Well, that's good to hear. Now, both Ossining and Peekskill are very heterogeneous communities and people from all different backgrounds. Has that changed the police force in the sense of language, who you're hiring, and so on? What
Yeah, definitely. We look to keep our force as diverse as the community is. We actively recruit individuals who speak Spanish. We have a large Spanish-speaking population, and that only helps us when we have Spanish-speaking officers. We've even negotiated in our collective bargaining agreement a stipend for the Spanish-speaking officers, just because they do get a little bit more work thrown their way. So yeah, we definitely look to make our police department a mirror image of our community.
Right. We had. I guess it's past tense with me, but in the department, I think it was 7 or 8 different languages were spoken by members of the department. Civil service sort of contains you on who you can hire, but it's always a plus if they have a second language to go with them. It's used constantly, especially the Hispanic languages.
Yeah, no question about it.
Right.
And then you have to build a trust, especially with the Spanish population. They come from an area of the world where there isn't as much trust between the community and policing. So, we have that challenge ahead of us, and it's much easier accomplished with people who speak their language and can converse and get that point across to them.
Well, on that line, maybe not with diversity, but I know one of the things that they said about Joe at his retirement activities was your involvement with sports with kids as a chief, or I don't know what your expectation was for other officers, but is there something about that? Just being not the police that you fear, but the police that you know and understand.
I started with that. Well, I mean, the interest started long before that, but when I became youth officer back in the 80s, it was, how do you get involved? How do you get to know them? And part of it was to get involved in the high school. I was involved in the Little League parts of it, and I got involved in the high school. And I always felt that the 30 or 40 football players that were standing next to me all knew me, but 5 or 10 of their friends behind me started to know who I was. And when I appeared in the school, it was more of a friendly atmosphere than it was, what are you doing here? Who are you arresting? Who are you dragging in? That started off, and we used to go into the school and just leave the school to do exactly nothing, just to be there. And when we had to make it, take action, we took action, and it was very quiet and got out. But the youth part helped. And the other thing, it helped me. It was something else to do. It was an outlet for me. I thank the village and the school boards for allowing me to have fun.
Right. It must be a very tense position to be in as chief or a police officer. It's a very tense.
Especially a police officer today. It's a very difficult job. It's not easy. We're constantly under the microscope, and the men and women that are out in the field every day are 99.9% of them are in the profession for the right reason and are doing admirable and noble jobs at protecting their respective communities. So we're
Eric,
lucky.
you said
we're lucky
women.
for that.
You said women. Okay, let's think back to Joe when you started. There couldn't have been a woman on the force.
No, there wasn't for quite a while.
Yeah. We have a number of women in our job. I know you did as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, women bring a lot to policing without question. They're problem solvers, as are men, but they solve problems sometimes in a different way. They're very nurturing, which can be helpful in certain situations. They definitely have a role in policing, and they're here to stay. And I think we run a youth police academy every year in the summertime, and this past year, it's usually about 25 people. This past year was the first time that the majority of those that attended the youth police academy were young females. I think they were represented 14 to 12. There's 26 of them, so it was more females than males.
Right.
In the class.
Are you trying to develop then young people to go into policing? Is that, or is it
part
just
of the goal?
Part of the goal.
Part of the goal is to build friendships and relationships. But the other part is to introduce policing as a career and hopefully recruit people into the field and recruit local people. That's a huge part. And just to piggyback on what Joe was saying, it was a time, and I'm sure Ossining was the same way, in Peekskill, that you had a residency requirement, and most people that were on the police force were from the community, and everybody knew the police officers. Well, that's since changed, and a lot of times you have people coming into the community that aren't from Peekskill or aren't from Ossining, and they're not known. So how do you get to know them? You bring them into the schools, introduce them, and build those relationships, because they last, and they make our problems much easier to solve.
Are the schools pretty receptive to this? Because I know there was a period of time where I think maybe we didn't want mental health people from outside coming in, or maybe policing. Maybe DARE was one of the ways that it or youth officer. You a DARE person at that point, or just a youth officer?
I was a youth officer and a DARE officer.
And a DARE officer. So I think it seems like that was kind of I don't know. It seems like that was kind of the beginning of getting police into the schools.
What we're doing in Ossining was that the patrol officer has the responsibility at least once, and hopefully more than once, to visit the school during the day. Just come in, check with the office, make sure it's all right, and then they get to see the kids. Sometimes they're at the playground and stuff. They're at the dismissal, and so we're trying to get the officer to be seen at the schools. Two different reasons. The bad guy sees the car pulling up, so he doesn't want to come in to play, and it just gives a security to the school and stuff, and we go from there.
Yeah, we do similar activities. We're lucky in Peekskill. We have an excellent relationship with our school district administrative staff and the individual schools. We did take it a step further, where we've introduced a program called Real Talk, and we kicked off this past summer, right before school started, a tailgater type of barbecue to welcome the incoming freshmen. We had police officers on hand, all cooked hamburgers and hot dogs, and played some games with the incoming freshmen. And then we're expanding that throughout the year to bring different officers into the school to just have like a roundtable discussion, much like we're having here, just so that officers can see
Everybody knows
students.
that they're human beings,
Right,
too.
and they
yes.
know, they realize that the police officer is a mother or a father or a coach, likes to play golf or go fishing, and they have the same interests, similar, and then the police officer gets to see the student as a real person, and it breaks down that barrier, because I found, and I'm sure you've seen it too, that there's a barrier sometimes between police and the community, and it's almost an intimidation factor on both sides.
Did you bring donuts too?
Oh, of course, you gotta have donuts.
Donuts too. So let me ask you about, I assume that the drug problem issue has been going on for a long time. Has it had changes over your policing time, or?
In the 60s, 70s, heroin was the drug. You know, I mean, marijuana was out there and everything else, but heroin was the drug. And then all of a sudden, heroin just fell off the board. It didn't disappear completely, but in cocaine, crack cocaine, and that started yeah, I got it. Methamphetamines came up and about, and they were there, and I firmly believed that I would never see another heroin epidemic like it is. And then all of a sudden, it was like, you know, you turn around and all of a sudden everyone's into heroin, and it's, you know, it got cheaper and more of it, and it's just like, wow, you know, it hit so much and hit in different communities, and to really. As we know, people are dying left and right from this thing. You know, we had to go out and, you know, with first aid supplies, different, you know, needles to activate in case of an overdose, and
Right.
and
You were all, I guess you were all trained in that to
Correct.
be able to alter it, but
Yeah.
it's still the problem.
It is.
It's still the problem.
It's a real challenge. As a parent of a 15-year-old, it's a fear of mine. And as a police chief, I have the entire community to worry about, and it's a fear that I have, and it's just a challenge to always to try and get the message out to our youth how dangerous drugs are, and to go after those that are targeting our youth, the dealers and the pushers, etc., and to just really take a multi-pronged approach to combating drugs, and that's enforcement, education, and prevention. I mean, that's.
And one of the preventative things that I think you've all been trying to do is to try to get prescriptions that aren't being used back into, I think you have drop-off places and so on to get
We put
add them out of the
we
medical.
put a drop-off box in our lobby, and we developed a policy for how often it was going to be emptied, and we figured, all right, once, maybe twice a year. We're emptying it once to twice a month.
right.
Oh my goodness!
So
wow.
it's really being
Right.
used. It's a resource
Right.
that has worked. I
People
do
have
believe.
recognized
Yes.
don't keep these drugs around.
Right. So
Right.
it's been a great resource.
Right. So how do you find the drug dealers? I mean, you can't give, we don't want to let them know
No.
how you do this, but how do people send word up that there are, some drug dealers coming up by train and whatever else? I mean,
There's
how do you find out
tips,
about
and
these things?
There's informants. You know, it may cost you a couple dollars to find different things out. You hate to say it, but there are deals made. You know, if you're locking somebody up for drugs and stuff like that, working through their sentencing, you're always trying to
find
get to the
other
higher
people.
level.
You want to get to the highest
That's
level.
it.
Right.
Right.
And work it out from there. And sometimes you just fall upon it. You know, sometimes a vehicle stop and there's a lot of stuff in there, and you start working it from there, and you find out where it's from, and and it's surprisingly, we make a very major crime that we went through Jersey and we ended up in Arizona.
Oh my goodness.
So
Right. So that was somebody that was coming here, selling from New
they
Jersey.
were starting in Arizona to New Jersey, coming to
Right.
Ossining,
Right.
and there was a big circle
Big
of and as you cut one part of it out, another part started up someplace else. There's somebody always there to pick up the pieces.
Right.
I think there's a real intolerance in our communities for drugs and drug dealers, and people are
reporting?
Yeah, they
and
are.
so
I
on?
mean, most of it's anonymous, and that's
Right.
fine.
Right.
But I also feel like people who are addicted are upset that they're addicted, and they sometimes feel the need to maybe help somebody behind them so that they don't become addicted, and they'll drop the dime at times, you know, just to prevent what's happened to them from happening to someone else. So
Right.
it's really there's a lack of tolerance for drugs. And
Right.
That's a full-time job.
Yeah,
It is a
absolutely.
full-time
It really
job.
is.
It really
Yeah.
is, right? So, what changed with September 11th and our obviously the whole terrorist issue and all of that? How has that kind of changed your life in the department?
Well, for one, there was a lot more money available to us federally to purchase equipment, and that was a positive. Another positive was the increased sharing of information between police departments and federal agencies and county agencies, and we've kind of come together, and I think there's been less of a rivalry and more of a teamwork mentality. It's not perfect, but that's been some of the good. The bad is you know, obvious. People have lost some freedoms. But I think most would give up that freedom to protect the country, and that's part of our goal and mission in Peekskill, although not as on as large a scale as a large municipality like New York City. But you know, again, we all have to work together, and that's what we do.
I think the respect level of law enforcement went up.
Oh, it did.
You know, now it's teetering because of, you know, our Clevelands and Florida and Texas and stuff like that, where one isolated incident is taking it. But overall, I think that they saw all these thousands of people leaving Manhattan and 1,000 police officers going into Manhattan.
Right.
You know, and not even there. I can remember on 9/11. Sitting in my office, listening to New York City asking for help, and we were sending police officers down there, and then you could see on television that they were getting applauded, and it was like, oh,
Yeah.
you know.
I remember driving into Manhattan on September 12th at night after a shift to go work at Ground Zero, and the line of people that were standing by with banners, homemade sandwiches in brown bags. They were
Oh, my
handing it out to
goodness.
us.
Right.
Thank you for what you do.
Right.
And it was just the most eerie feeling going into the city of lights that didn't have one light lit. But here were all these people handing out food and thanks and graciousness to us for what we did
Right.
or what we do. And you know, we did it before 9/11. We did it on 9/11. We've done it after 9/11. That's what police. That's what we
Right.
do. We run into situations where everybody else runs out, and it's unfortunate that it takes such a tragedy.
For people to understand,
that.
Right, right, absolutely.
and-
So you mentioned too with the federal government getting more funds and so on. So do you think over time that there's just been much more involvement with the federal government, state government, trying to help out with different programs, or is it pretty much the same? That's just we have different kinds of programs.
We do work together more. I mean, we work in task forces, so we're able to multiply our forces, so to speak.
Maybe the communication is so much better
It
that
is.
it makes it so
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
We build relationships and friendships, and we do talk to one another. It's much easier with technology now to talk to one another. So I think that's helped quite a bit.
Right. And, you know, in the area, I don't know whether this is expanded or not, but the whole area of domestic violence and family issues and so on, are they different than they'd been in the past, or is it always the same and we just hear about it differently? Or that's got to be a tough one, going into a house when there's been a problem.
There is.
It is.
You know,
Dangerous.
Yeah,
it is a
dangerous.
dangerous thing because you have we'll just say a husband and wife fighting and stuff like that, and you grab the husband to make an arrest, and all of a sudden you have a wife on the back saying, you know, you just don't understand,
Right.
you know, but you're the one that called us here.
Very
Right.
Wow,
Very
you know.
emotional.
Right. Yes.
And nobody
right.
knows exactly what they want to do and stuff. And the reporting systems have gotten stricter. The mandatory arrests have gotten stricter, and so the actions are taken more. But it's still a volatile situation that you don't know which way you're going to. And part of my 15-minute interview must have been 5 minutes of the present chief, telling me about domestic violence, the worst call you can go into. So in 1967, he was
right.
telling me a war story about domestic violence.
So it was the same.
It was
Yeah.
the same.
Right. That's a family
agree,
volatile
Yep.
issue. What do you get the most calls on? Do you know? I mean, does it change from year to year or month to month, or like?
It does.
Does
It's depending on the season. Sometimes towards the end of the school year, we get a lot of calls on youths who are disorderly. Domestic violence is certainly up there. Traffic enforcement is an issue. Noise complaints. I mean, we do everything from a barking dog to a violent crime and everything in between.
Right.
4 pages that I looked at a review every month, the amount of calls, and there's 4 pages of different types of calls.
Everything. Yeah, you
Right.
can't even classify it.
No.
And some of the ones you just shake your head at.
You don't. You have no idea what's coming next. Well, I remember somebody calling my office to get rid of a rabid a skunk that had gone down in a hole. But I wasn't competent in doing something. I don't know who they called next.
We've done it.
Have you done it?
We've done
well,
it.
certainly
Oh, yeah.
the cat in the tree or
We've done it.
whatever
That's
else.
it.
You name it, we've done it. There's not too many situations that are, I've never heard of that one before.
Right.
Most of the time, it's
Right. So what's the new technology that you have that has been helpful as you go along?
I get the most one that's out there in the press is the body cams that
Mm-hmm.
we're using right now. We've been in, I guess this is our second year of using body cams, and we've never had to use it to the negative side of it, but it's always been there. We did show it on a very positive one time when the officers clicked it on, and he ended up in the CO atmosphere and stuff like that, and they made life-saving on 2 of the people that had already collapsed and taken out a dozen.
I saw that video. It was that was just a fascinating video, and it showed exactly what police officers do every day. They run into situations where other people, and in this case they couldn't get out, but brought them to safety.
It's almost too bad that we really don't know. I mean, I'm not really totally involved with what you do because you go along your day and your business, but I can understand what you do. But I think I don't know, how do we tell people enough? Well, this show is one way to do it,
Right.
but for people to really understand what your day is like.
It's difficult to comprehend what we do.
Right.
It's just a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day operation is difficult for most people to understand how that works.
Right.
How do you staff that? How do you get the people
Right.
to do it?
I tell people sometimes it's a very depressing job. I says, can you imagine coming to work with a gun, putting it in your locker, and putting
Right.
on a bigger gun,
Right.
putting on a vest, and putting
Right.
all this gear on just to go out to work? And I mean, I realize welders and construction people do the same thing, but it's just a little
Very
bit different.
But it can be rewarding. It definitely has its rewards.
Yes, well, we're glad you're all there,
Yeah.
and I want to thank both Eric and Joe for being on my program. And
My pleasure,
you know,
yeah.
I didn't have a chance to. Joe decided at one point he didn't want any more honors, so I brought him a citation for his 48 years plus of work in policing. And
Thank
I know
you.
he said, no, don't do this, and but we need to do that. So I
Deserve
thank
it.
you both very much, and if you have any questions about what you've heard, please give me a call at 914-941-1111. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good evening.